If you believe in second chances, subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Your inspiring story could be next. The silence in Clara Evans's small apartment was a living thing, thick and heavy, like the humid summer air that seeped through the window frames. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the quiet of dread, a stillness that amplified the frantic beating of her own heart. At 52, Clara felt every one of her years etched into the deep lines around her nines, and the persistent ache in her lower back, a souvenir from 3 decades spent on her feet, balancing trays of coffee and sympathy as a waitress at the old Starlight Diner. The diner was her life, a place of familiar smells and faces, but it paid just enough to keep her head slightly above water. Now the water was closing in. On the small, wobbly kitchen table, next to a half-empty mug of cold coffee, lay the source of the suffocating silence, a folded piece of paper with angry red letters shouting words she didn't need to read again. Final notice to vacate. The words had burned themselves into her memory. She had 14 days. 14 days to come up with 3 months of back rent or find a new place to live. A laughable prospect when her bank account currently held a grand total of $47.32. Her eyes drifted around the room, cataloging the life she was about to lose. The apartment wasn't much. Studio with a kitchenette that smelled perpetually of old pipes and the faint ghost of burnt toast. But it was hers. Every crack in the plaster was a familiar map. The faded floral armchair in the corner, its springs groaning in protest whenever she sat, had been a proud purchase from a second-hand store a decade ago. On her small bookshelf, a silver-framed photo of her late husband. Mark smiled out at her, his eyes full of the easy optimism she had once shared. He'd been gone for 7 years, taken by a heart attack that came as swiftly and mercilessly as the eviction notice. Since then, it had just been her, paddling against a relentless current. Clara pushed herself up from the table, her joints protesting. She walked over to the window and looked down at the bustling street 3 floors below. Horns blared, people rushed by, a whole world moving forward while she was stuck, sinking in quicksand. For a moment, a wave of pure, paralyzing despair washed over her. It would be so easy to just give up, to let the current pull her under. She'd fought for so long, worked double shifts until her feet were swollen and numb, patched up old clothes until they were more thread than fabric, and lived on a diet of diner leftovers and instant noodles. And for what? To end up here on the brink of homelessness, with nothing to show for a lifetime of hard work but exhaustion and a notice to vacate. She closed her eyes, forcing the tears back. Crying wouldn't help. Panicking wouldn't help. She needed a solution, a lifeline, a miracle. She turned away from the window, her gaze landing on the old television humming quietly in the corner. She usually kept it on for company, the low murmur of voices a comforting presence in the empty apartment. The local evening news was on, the anchor's voice, a smooth professional drone. And for residents facing financial hardship, the city has partnered with several community outreach programs. Help is available. If you're struggling with utility bills or rent payments, please do not hesitate to call. Clara's head snapped up. Her heart gave a hopeful flutter. A program. A hotline. Maybe this was it. She fumbled on the counter for a pen, her fingers clumsy with a sudden surge of adrenaline. The only thing she could find was a blue crayon from a coloring book she kept for her niece's visits. For paper, she grabbed the back of a wrinkled grocery receipt from her pocket. The number for the Emergency Payment Assistance Service is... The anchor began. Clara leaned in, her eyes glued to the screen, crayon poised. The camera cut to a graphic, but it was a quick one, a lower third banner that seemed to vanish as soon as it appeared. In her haste, she focused on the next set of numbers that filled the screen. It was a bright, flashy graphic, much more colorful than the previous one. Big, bold, white numbers inside vibrant circles. It must be the number, she thought, repeated for emphasis. Her mind, clouded with stress and a desperate, singular focus, didn't register the playful animation or the large, unmistakable Powerball logo at the top of the screen. All she saw were numbers. A lifeline. With a shaky hand, she scribbled them down on the back of the receipt. 08, 21, 34, 55, 67. And then, a final, smaller number, in a red circle. 11. There. She had it. A surge of relief, so potent it almost made her dizzy, flooded through her. It was just a phone number, a series of digits on a crumpled receipt, but it felt like the key to her survival. She carefully folded the receipt and placed it on the small corkboard by her door, pinning it right next to the smiling photo of Mark, as if seeking his approval. "Okay, Mark," she whispered to the picture, her voice hoarse. "I have a plan. First thing tomorrow, I'll call them. It's going to be okay." That night, for the first time in weeks, Clara slept without the gnawing anxiety twisting her stomach into knots. She didn't dream of riches or a life of luxury. She dreamed of something much simpler, much more precious, the feeling of turning the key in her own lock, the comfort of her lumpy mattress, and the quiet dignity of having a place to call home. She dreamed of normalcy. The next morning, the sun streamed through her window with an optimism Clara finally felt she could share. She made herself a cup of coffee, real coffee, not the instant, kinda small celebration of the hope she now carried. After her shower, she stood before the corkboard, took a deep breath, and unpinned the receipt. This was it. The call that would change everything. She picked up her old landline phone. Her cell service had been shut off 2 months ago, and carefully dialed the first set of numbers she had written down. Her finger trembled as she pressed the last digit. She listened, her breath held tight in her chest, waiting for the voice of a city official, a social worker, anyone who could offer her a path out of this nightmare. Instead of a ringing tone, she heard a pre-recorded voice, chipper and automated. "Good morning, and thank you for calling the National Powerball Results Hotline. Yesterday's winning numbers were..." Clara froze, the phone still pressed to her ear. The automated voice continued, cheerful and oblivious, reciting the exact sequence of numbers she was holding in her hand. 8, 21, 34, 55, 67. A pause, and the Powerball is 11. The receipt fluttered from her numb fingers and drifted to the floor. Her mind raced, trying to connect the impossible dots, the news report, the flashy graphic, the numbers. It wasn't a hotline. It wasn't a help service. It was the lottery. A wave of nausea and crushing disappointment washed over her. Her one hope, her lifeline, was a stupid, pointless mistake. She had written down the winning numbers to a lottery she hadn't even played. The universe wasn't just ignoring her, it was mocking her. She sank into the worn floral armchair, the silence of the room once again pressing in, heavier and more mocking than ever before, as the automated voice on the phone cheerfully announced the jackpot amount, a staggering sum that was utterly, cruelly meaningless to her. But then, a memory sparked in the fog of her despair, a faint, insignificant memory from the day before, standing at the counter of the corner store, buying a loaf of bread and a small carton of milk with the last of her cash. The total was $8. The clerk, a young man named Kevin, had handed her $2 in change, and on an impulse she couldn't explain, distracted by the worry churning in her gut, she had pointed to the little dispenser of lottery tickets and said the words she hadn't said in years. "Just give me one quick pick for tonight's Powerball." It was a foolish waste of $2 she couldn't afford, a gesture of pure, thoughtless desperation. The ticket was still in her purse, forgotten, dismissed as another one of her small, hopeless mistakes. Her purse. The worn faux leather bag she'd carried for years, its strap frayed and its corners scuffed. It was sitting on the floor by the armchair, a silent witness to her despair just moments earlier. The memory of the $2 ticket was a tiny, improbable flicker in the overwhelming darkness of her mistake. It couldn't be. It was a fool's hope, a final, cruel trick, played by a heart desperate for any reprieve. But the flicker remained, and it was enough to make her move. Her body felt disconnected, moving on its own as she lunged for the purse, her breath catching in her throat. She upended it onto the faded rug, its humble contents spilling out in a chaotic pile, a half-used tube of hand lotion, a scattering of loose pennies, several crumpled tissues, her keys, and a thick stack of old receipts. Her hands, still trembling from the shock of the phone call, tore through the pile with a frantic urgency. It wasn't there. Of course, it wasn't there. She had probably thrown it away, dismissing it as the meaningless scrap of paper it was. Defeat washed over her again, cold and sharp. She was about to slump back into the chair when her fingers brushed against a small, stiff rectangle tucked into a side pocket she rarely used. She pulled it out. It was a small, white slip of paper with a series of numbers printed in familiar blue ink, a quintpick. She scrambled for the grocery receipt she had dropped on the floor, the one with the numbers she had scribbled in crayon. With shaking hands, she held the two slips of paper side by side. The world seemed to shrink until only these two pieces of paper existed. She read the numbers aloud, her voice a cracked whisper. 8:21. A match. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 34:55. Another match. It was getting hard to breathe. 67. It was real. Every single one of the main numbers matched. She looked at the final number on her ticket, the Powerball. It was 11. She stared at the red crayon scrawl on the receipt. 11. A perfect match. For a long, silent moment, Clara didn't move. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just sat there on the floor, surrounded by the debris of her life, holding a piece of paper worth more money than she could possibly comprehend. An astronomical figure, the automated voice had quoted, a number so large it felt like a fiction. Then, a sound escaped her lips. It started as a choked gasp and erupted into a laugh. It wasn't a laugh of joy, but of pure, unadulterated shock. It was the sound of a reality breaking, of a lifetime of struggle being rendered obsolete in a single, absurd instant. She laughed until tears streamed down her face, until her stomach hurt. The sheer cosmic absurdity of it all washing over her in waves. She, Clara Evans, who counted every penny and reused tea bags, was now one of the richest people in the country. All because of a wrong number. Slowly the hysterical laughter subsided, replaced by a profound, terrifying clarity. This ticket, this tiny piece of paper, was now the most important thing in her life. She had to protect it. Her eyes darted around the room, seeing threats everywhere. The flimsy lock on her door, the window that didn't quite close properly. She scrambled to her feet, the ticket clutched in her fist. She needed to hide it somewhere safe, somewhere no one would ever think to look. Her gaze fell upon the bookshelf and the silver-framed photo of Mark. Next to it was his favorite book, a worn hardcover edition of To Kill a Mockingbird. He had read it a dozen times, its pages soft with use. With reverent hands, she picked up the book, opened it to a random page in the middle, and carefully placed the lottery ticket inside, nestled safely between the words of a story about justice and quiet courage. She closed the book and put it back, her secret hidden in plain sight. Looking at Mark's smiling face, she felt a fresh wave of tears, but this time they were different. They were for him, for the life they had planned, for the hardships he had missed, for the impossible miracle he wasn't here to share. "Can you believe this, Mark?" she whispered, touching the cool glass of the frame. What in the world am I supposed to do now? His smiling eyes offered no answers, but looking at him grounded her. What would Mark have done? He would have been practical. He would have been calm. He would have told her to take a deep breath and make a smart plan. First things first, she signed the back of the ticket. Her signature, usually a hurried scrawl, was slow and deliberate. Then she remembered another news segment, one of those fluff pieces they ran after a big jackpot, about the essential first steps for a lottery winner. Get a lawyer and a financial advisor before you do anything else. Her first instinct was to look in the yellow pages for cheap lawyer, her mind still wired for poverty. She stopped herself. She didn't need a cheap lawyer. She needed the best. She used the old, slow desktop computer in the corner, the one she usually only used for email, and searched for the top-rated estate and financial law firms in the city. She found a name that exuded competence and discretion, took another deep breath, and made the call. The receptionist was audibly skeptical of the woman calling from a landline with a shaky voice, claiming to hold a winning Powerball ticket, but she agreed to pass the message along. Within the hour, the firm's senior partner called her back personally. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings in sterile, intimidating boardrooms. Clara, dressed in her best and only blouse, sat across from men and women in tailored suits who spoke a language of trusts, annuities, and tax implications she couldn't understand. But they were patient. They were respectful. They saw not a flustered waitress, but a client. They helped her set up an ironclad trust, ensuring her privacy and protecting her newfound wealth. The public would know a winning ticket was sold in her city, but her name, Clara Evans, would remain anonymous. The first tangible proof of her new reality came when her lawyer helped her open a new bank account. When she saw the balance on the screen for the first time, the number was so long it looked like a mistake. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were looking at someone else's life. On the 10th day after the win, with the eviction notice's deadline looming, she received a call from a familiar number. It was her landlord, Mr. Peterson, his voice oozing with impatient condescension. "Clara, 4 days left. I hope you have a plan, because I have already got new tenants lined up. The 15, you're out. No excuses." A month ago, this call would have sent her into a spiral of panic. Now she felt a calm, quiet power settle over her. "Actually, Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice even and steady, "I'd like to schedule a meeting with you, in person, to discuss the building." He was confused, but he agreed, likely expecting a desperate plea for an extension. They met the next day, in the lobby of his downtown office. He sat behind a large, imposing desk, leaning back with a smug look. "All right, Clara, what's this about? If you're here to beg—" "I'm not," she interrupted gently. "I'm here to buy the building from you." Mr. Peterson stared, then let out a short, barking laugh. "Buy the—" "Clara, did you hit your head? You can't afford your rent. You can't afford to buy my lunch." Clara didn't flinch. She simply slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was an offer, drafted by her lawyers, for the entire apartment building. The price was significantly above market value, a cash offer that would close in less than a week. Mr. Peterson's laughter died in his throat. He picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the numbers, his face turning from amusement to disbelief, and finally to pale shock. He looked up at her, seeing her for the first time not as his struggling tenant, but as something else entirely. "How?" was all he could manage to say. "I had a change in fortune," Clara replied, a small, knowing smile on her lips. "The building is not for sale," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Everything is for sale for the right price, Mr. Peterson," she said, echoing a phrase she had once heard him use on another tenant. "My offer is more than fair. You'll never get another one like it." 2 weeks later, Clara Evans was no longer a tenant. She was a landlady. Her first act as the new owner was to draft new lease agreements for all the residents. She lowered the rent for everyone by 20% and established a community fund, seeded with her own money, to help any resident who fell on hard times, ensuring that no one in her building would ever have to face the terror of an eviction notice alone. That evening she stood at her window, looking out at the same street. The world outside hadn't changed, but her world had been completely rebuilt. The suffocating silence was gone, replaced by a quiet hum of purpose. She was still Clara Evans, the woman who loved the smell of coffee and the comfort of a worn armchair. But she was also something more. She was a guardian, a provider, a beacon of hope born from a simple, beautiful mistake. The wrong number hadn't just given her money, it had given her a mission, and for the first time in a very long time, she looked forward to tomorrow. The story of Clara Evans teaches us that sometimes our greatest mistakes can become our greatest blessings. Luck isn't always about finding the right answer. Occasionally, it's born from the chaos and confusion of our darkest moments. The true value of wealth lies not in saving oneself, but in gaining the means to lift others, transforming a stroke of individual luck into a legacy of collective hope. Destiny may bring us to our knees, but it can also hand us the map to a new beginning, often hidden where we least expect it. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of incredible twists of fate.